Aloha. Hey, this is Philip. This week on Educational Triage, we talk about assessments, the good, the bad, the ugly. So here we go.
This is the Educational Triage Podcast. Welcome. We invite you to come along with us on an exploration of interviews, issues, and other exciting and relevant topics in education, especially alternative education. They say alternative education is a laboratory for mainstream education. Why? Well, join us every week and listen in as Philip Summers
Aloha.
and I, Tony Hunt, jump in feet first to discuss issues that may affect our classes, students, communities, as well as our teaching. Please subscribe if you enjoy and find relevance in what you experience here. And if you haven't left a quick review, please do. We appreciate your candor and insights so we can improve as we move forward. Now, let's see what's on board today.
Aloha, everybody. Welcome to Educational Triage. I am here with Tony Hunt today. Tony, I didn't put any superlatives before your name. I should have. Illustrious and distinguished are just two generic ones that I can think of. They're not generic for you, however, they're true. How are you?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Philip Summers.
Well, you're welcome. It's true. I've known you a long time. You're a man of high moral fiber.
Well, thank you. Do you realize that we have known each other nearly 30 years and have worked together nearly 30 years?
Yeah.
Isn't that
scary.
amazing?
Yes, it is. Yes. I can't count that high in my toes and hands. So
wow.
It's true. I've learned that. It's true. 10 years ago, I stopped doing that. Anyway.
What are we talking about today?
Yes. We're talking about assessments, testing, grading, the ways that we get to the end of a project or a paper or whatever, and then we put a quality grade on it or some sort of summative assessment, hopefully more than just one. But yeah, there are a bunch and everyone knows about them. They know the multiple choice tests and they know the standardized tests. Yeah, right. Which, by the way, both of those are on the list of test methods that aren't so effective. Those are like, I think 3 and 4 or 1 and 2 or something. It's nuts.
So,
yeah.
Well, that leads into the primary question then, and that is, what is an effective assessment or form of grading?
That's exactly the question that we should be asking ourselves. And I went through Chat GPT because it can assess a lot of information. And I asked it certain questions. The first question I asked was, what are the most dynamic and complete forms of educational assessment? And it gave me 10 results. It likes 10s, I guess. And then I asked it, what are the most complete and effective forms of assessment in alternative ed? And it came up, with 10 of those.
Are they different?
And of those, there are so many similarities and there are so many crossovers. That I would say they're not too different. For example, when you're looking at like the original list of like all the best innovative way or all the best ways of doing it, dynamic and complete has formative up there, and alt ed does too. So they both consider formative assessment to be.
So remind me what formative assessment is.
Yep, formative assessment is a continuous assessment conducted on a project or a paper. For example, if you're writing a research paper and you have a conference with the teacher every week to see what your research looks like. Now, what is your what's your initial paragraph look like, that sort of thing. That's a formative assessment. He or she or they are guiding you as you go and assessing it that way too. So that's a very individualized form of assessment.
So we are they're assessing the formation of whatever it is that we're doing. Is that correct? Is that a good way of looking at it?
It's just continually assessing the learning process. It's given kids like that. They like to know they're on the right track.
Yeah.
and giving them a clear understanding of what the objectives are. Yeah.
Well, yeah, especially
Well,
the kids that might have some kind of anxiety, and it's also a good way to
oh,
rein
yeah.
in some of the kids who may have suddenly developed an idea of what it is that they need to be doing, but they are, let's just say they're off the mark. And so
It
it's a
might
way of
be.
reining them back in and keeping people so that one, they are encouraged to continue the way that they're going, two, to
Yeah.
nudge them into where they need to be so that they can develop from there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, just forming forming their assessment, as they're going along, helping kids along, it really helps. Um, portfolios are another thing that show up on the list of complete dynamic forms, and also an alternative ed. So portfolio work, or a body of presented work, is a good way to do it too. But it
Okay.
can't be summative. It can't be like, okay, here is your objective. You're going to produce this portfolio. Here's your subject. Here are your guidelines. Go. Your assessment comes at the end. That's a summative. It's like, it's an all or nothing kind of high stakes in
Hmm.
there. Like, if what you produce is off the mark, there's an F floating around in the air. Someone might land on it. But it's
Question.
formative, of course, would be helping you along. Yeah.
Okay. Portfolios. Maybe we should do an episode on portfolios in the future.
Yeah,
Um,
perhaps.
because I remember 20 some odd years ago, 30 years ago,
Mhm.
we
Yep.
were embroiled in having to work through portfolios,
Yep.
and even just the cover sheet that was going on to each piece that went into the portfolio became there. It was, it used to be very simple, and then all of a sudden it became this sort of Frankensteinian dystopian kind of form that had all these boxes to tick off, and
Right.
it was just all the superfluous data. And then finally I just said,
Yeah.
look, this is what I'm using, this is where we're going to go. And people went with that. It, but also the amount of paperwork, the amount of space, it was,
Oh,
we're going to have to do
well,
something on that because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole
yeah.
today. But
Well,
that
for those of you
is
who don't remember, yeah, once upon a time, you were supposed to put together this body of work called a portfolio. And at the end
for
of it,
every student.
your journey through high school was assessed on this piece of work. And you were supposed to collaborate with your teacher. Excuse me. And, you're supposed to come up with the reasons why you like these pieces of work and such. And they bought folders in our district. They were very nice folders, very nice
Mhm.
portfolio folders. And I don't know where they went, but there were thousands of them. They were everywhere. And they never implemented it. But
They
that would
allowed
be
this.
interesting.
What they did do was at the high schools, they allowed students who wanted to come
Yeah,
forward and to display some of their portfolio work in front of a committee. And
that's what it
so,
was.
and
Okay.
so, well, there were only some of them
That
because
was the
I was
can,
on the
wasn't it?
committee.
Yeah.
I was on the committee
Okay.
at the one high school, and so
Yeah.
was our fearless leader. And
Mhm.
I think she was on a couple, it, she was on the committee a couple of times. I was on it several times. And we
Yeah.
met with different students, and I believe they were each given 5 to 10 minutes,
Yeah, it sounded like something it
which,
was. There was the initial mastery and the advanced mastery is what it was.
right.
And I don't know, I can't recall. Uh, I was gearing up for it. I also worked in alt ed, and there were very few kids in alt ed who wanted to do that. They
Mhm.
just wanted to get done, go see ya. So it's like, would you like to do more work? And they said, not really. No, more work doesn't sound good to me.
Right.
So they kind of said no.
Right.
But it's
Because
interesting.
it didn't
But
really
then
make
making
any relevant sense.
kind of never did. And that was one of the things that showed up on the list of really bad assessments, was not being related to real life application. Kind of like
Hmm.
literally that question you have in math that math teacher says, when are we going to use this? It's
Hmm.
like, it's true though. But in math there might be a disconnect, but when it comes to like some of the all subjects, it's like you can't be getting away with lessons that are not particularly pertinent to what's going on. So that's a bad way to go.
But I will say that if I were hiring a teacher today,
Mhm.
I would want them to have a portfolio. And I would want to have portfolios of work
Mm,
examples, video examples so that we can see and we can
okay.
assess interactions with students, what assignments they have, et cetera, et cetera. Because remember, when we sat
Yeah.
down and we were talking, how do you actually know that what you're getting is what you're seeing?
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah, person's great at interviewing, but they're terrible whatever it is you're interviewing them for.
Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I would prefer to see something, um, even if it was problematic, even if they can look at me and say, this was an awful
yeah,
day, and I can look at it, and I would be the one to assess whether or not it was an awful day. It really depends on the interaction, on what happened, what the circumstances were, and everything that
mm,
went. So an awful day may actually be one of the best criteria to hire somebody from, because if they handle themselves well, et cetera, then that is a
yeah.
really good demonstration of the quality of teacher that you're going to be getting, I think.
Well, according to our lists, which I don't
Hmm.
disagree with, I have to add that too. Even though I did use Chat GPT, I have a little bit of inclination toward the subject. So I knew when it came up with something a little bit like, that doesn't look quite right.
Yeah, you got to
Assess
double
that.
check. You
Yeah,
do
it's
have to
it's
check it.
not almighty, but it did come up with that for both. Portfolios are an excellent way to assess. So yeah, if you're going to interview that way, you're on to something good. Peer
I would
assess
hope
and
so.
self assess are also up there with the innovative and effective ways of doing things.
So, talk to me about peer assessment. What does that mean and how does it work? How do you see it? How would you use that in your classroom then?
Well, if you had to use peer assessment, you'd have to have uh, the knowledge of the peers that are being assessed. So, if peers assessing another peer, they know them or they know the criteria by which they're going to do it. They don't just kind of make it up as they go. And you need to teach that skill, I think, too, because what's constructive and what's not constructive. It's a great skill if you got a really close knit class. Peer
Hmm.
assessment. Um, it takes time to teach it to students because they don't understand what it is an assessment really is, or why they could do that, or how they could do that. But if they're really honest and the other person is receptive, they
Hmm.
can learn an awful lot from each other, especially when it comes to, like, let's say they assess each other's role in a project they're doing together, and then the teacher can compare the two, to what the other person thought they were doing, sort of thing. It's an interesting way of looking at it.
But I
A lot of
thought,
people work in the blind, and so when they get things get revealed to them, they sort of go, "Hot dog, thank you." And you have to teach that. You can't
yeah.
how to deliver that news and how to accept it. Yeah,
Hmm.
but it's really good to peer assess. I mean, if you trust the people you're working with, it's really valuable.
Um, I believe that if you're using a rubric and you have student
Yeah,
input on the rubric,
yeah,
and that way they're very familiar with what goes into the rubric,
yeah.
and if you do some samples, and so you can go over those with them, and
Mhm.
it also evinces a lot of comfort and self-confidence when they feel as though they are part of the system. And so if you and I need to peer evaluate
Yeah.
each other, because Mr. Brodigan or whoever is our teacher says,
Mhm.
you will be doing this now. And we
Yep.
sit down and we have that rubric in front of us and we're looking at whatever it is that we're doing, whether it be
And
math
you'll be graded.
or whatever, and we talk to each other. And so we know what the expectations are for each
Yeah, you
trait.
have to know what it's about. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Rubric based assessment is actually on the list of good things, good ways of educational assessment. It's also on the bad list. Isn't that weird?
Explain. Okay, for our listeners, I think that we know what makes rubrics really good, especially if there's student input in creating this, because
Yeah.
that way they have ownership in what they do.
Mm-hmm.
But why would a rubric be a poor evaluative tool?
Well, I guess what they're probably alluding to is what ChatGPT qualified it as, is if it's an incomplete or irrelevant rubric, if what's in it isn't getting to what you want to assess. And so that would be, what they would consider to be, what did they call it here? Don't they go ineffective standard relationship. Yeah, an assessment's disconnected from real world application. So I'd kind of agree with that. It can go wrong if you
Mm-hmm.
rely on a rubric because it's very rigid.
Yeah.
But it's very effective because it's very clear. So it's skill there.
Is a rubric really that rigid?
Well, it can direct you if you do it right. And right
Yeah.
as in I mean wrong. I mean, you can manipulate rubrics. There's certain, if you keep information out or if you don't directly relate it, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
things get a little wonky. It kind of fell into the indirect
Okay.
relationship category, but rubrics as a form was directly um, in the dynamic and complete forms of assessment. So
Right. And I would say to our listeners that a really good text for rubrics is by Dannelle Stevens. And I do not see it in front of me. Oh, there it is. It is called An Introduction to Rubrics. And let me pull it down here. And this is it. And I will put down the information in the show notes. So, because what she does is she goes through and she makes it very simple. So don't make them complicated, make them simple. You can add the complications later on, but the students need to have them simple. And then as you go, you can always ask and build on those and ask the students what's missing or what do we need to do in order to make this better.
Right. And one of the other ones that showed up was adaptive testing across the board.
What's adaptive testing? We know what testing is, but
what is adaptive testing? So according to ChatGPT, adjust the difficulty of questions based on students' previous responses, and it provides a personal assessment experience, efficiently gauging a student's proficiency level. So it's building on the questions that came before it, I guess, or adjusting the difficulty. Yeah, there's a big thing about in alt ed about using AI, and I thought that was very interesting. But I have yet to get into things like AI yet, or alternative credits and badges and sort of things like that.
But is there a way to use artificial intelligence to create an adaptive test? Because I'm not sure how.
Imagine there would be.
Let's say that even if you have a class of 15,
right,
that is an ungodly kind of labor.
It's got to be.
I'm thinking of Hercules.
Generated. Yeah,
what's that?
You got to computer generate it. It's computer generated. But it has to be because it's adjusting to your proficiency level. So
is it going to be something along the lines of but that means that the artificial intelligence is also doing the summation and also doing the grading of it.
Yeah.
So
it would be, wouldn't it? Yikes.
So there are so many questions that I have with that, because students then, because after using the computer platforms where they do the grading of the writing and everything else in the curriculum, if students don't use the correct terminologies and format and the right wording, it bypasses it and says that they don't understand it, when you can go in there and look at it and you say, yeah,
Mhm.
you did understand what was going on. So it's, what's
Yeah.
the word? It's unreliable.
Well, it would seem to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I wouldn't trust it. It's artificial intelligence of some sort, not AI per se, but computer based. It's making calculations. For example, proficiency at the beginning of a history unit online. So, World War II, origins of, and it gives you like 15 questions. What was this? What was that? It does it in multiple choice form, but it assesses your proficiency, and then it assigns questions based upon what you lack, what your deficiencies are. You need to study those. And then you're given a summative test at the end of the unit or the chapter or whatever it is that covers both categories. And or the ones that you don't understand first. It can do that too. So you won't see, if you know questions on Pearl Harbor backward and forward, it's not going to ask you anything about Pearl Harbor anymore. It's going to insert questions about Midway or something because you don't really have a knowledge of what Midway was, for example.
But if you're answering those questions, aren't you simply just regurgitating something that you've memorized? Isn't that
Yeah.
more of a multiple
Yeah.
choice test or a standardized test, which is not seen
Yeah.
as
No,
an
those are
effective
bad.
form of assessment?
Yeah, those are bad forms of assessment. However, the computer base wants to assess what you know and don't know, I guess. And then it would assign you both the content and then the post content assessment based upon what you did not know. And that would be a form of doing that, I suppose I could think of an adaptive test. It's sort of like you don't, well, like you'd said, if the kid's gotten through half of history, why are you going to make them go through all the whole year if they've got, almost all of the content in the first half of history?
Right. You want them to have some kind of, well, there might be a recall, because we talk
Yeah,
about trigger points where maybe
yeah,
I don't recall something off the top of my head, but then somebody says something and all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, now I remember
yeah,
that. That's the
yeah.
most that we really need to require from students, I believe, because
Oh,
for them to walk
that's true.
around with everything that they've been taught in high school and grade school and middle school, and then at uni or trade school
Right.
is a bit unreasonable, wouldn't you say?
I think so too. Yeah, yeah. But on the same on the same hand, going to take a history course, for example, and I've already like done 2/3 of the first semester,
Mhm.
and I was good at history. I was just flaky at going to school. I would like to be able to test out. I always want to show my proficiency. Go, no, I can do this. Can you show me? Can I show you I can do this?
Right.
And yeah, but there's politics behind that too.
Well,
But
also, testing out of a class means that the school or the district is receiving less money, supposedly, because if you're not in
okay,
school, then they don't get the money.
right. So yeah, that makes sense. But there's also with innovative assessments. I came up with a third list. What are the most innovative assessments used in education?
Let's hear those. Blow my
Well, that
mind.
one that was many of them were just the same, but project based assessments, portfolios, peer assessment, game based assessments. I thought that was interesting. Gamification is used to create engaging assessments that measure problem solving ability, strategic thinking, and decision making skills.
But tell me more.
Uh,
Tell me more, because I am not a gamer.
yeah.
And I have a
Okay.
feeling
So,
that you are far
yeah.
more familiar with gaming than I am.
No, I'm very not informed about gaming, but I can use this example and I probably get it wrong. You trekkers out there will know this. So, um, so Captain Kirk had this, in the academy, you're given a problem that cannot be solved, and they measure your performance as a captain of a starship on how you react to the situation. Well, Kirk figured out a way to not only solve it. He rigged it so he won. And I can't remember what the name of the maneuver is, but everyone fails it. But Kirk figured a way to pass it, and it was their assessment. But Kirk went, not through the assessment. He went around, I think, and he had a computer program put in there, and he figured out how to make it so that he didn't actually get wiped out. He was surrounded by Romulan vessels on all sides. And so, what are you going to do next, Captain? He just sits back with an apple and crosses his legs and goes, "Oh, fire phasers 2 and 3 at this one, and 3 and 4 at that one." And it's like, what? He was calm and cool because he'd already figured out the problem. And that would be one of those assessments, one of those simulation or virtual reality assessments where you're the captain of the starship. Here's your crew. It was high tech, and you're going into combat.
Mm-hmm.
And here's your situation. Go. And then all hell broke loose. How is he going to react? And of course, he'd already figured out in the film. He'd already figured out. In the series, it was said that he was the only one that ever figured it out. But in the film, it showed that he had actually pirated this program from it. But yeah.
But
that's assessment.
Okay. But for the teachers out there, who may not be Trekkies, how would they employ gamification?
Well,
into their classroom?
I mean,
what does that mean?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I would love to know that, or I'm sorry, I'd love to do that. When it first came up, I'm thinking to myself, how can I make this happen? I wanted to do something with the Apollo command module, like create it and put the guys through scenarios. And I wondered if it was possible to get maker boards, to kind of come up with controls that would make things occur, computerize them. And, it would have been interesting. Simply because they learned so much about the space program, and we wanted to build a mock-up. And then I thought to myself, what if you could do simulations in the mock-up? I bet I could get my hands on some of those, but that's kind of a long shot. It, actually, like artificial, like virtual reality, it's like that would be tough because the props aren't there. I mean, that's hard to create at this point in time. I could see if everyone in the class had headsets on, like 5 people had headsets, and they're seeing the same thing, then it becomes much, much more real. But yeah, I don't know. I use that as an example of Captain Kirk because that's the one I thought of, as they were assessed on that. Here's your final assessment. You're screwed.
Okay.
And,
so to our audience, then, if you know anybody who uses gamification, let us know.
Yeah, please. Game-based,
reach out to us.
And simulation, virtual reality. They're all kind of like in the same bucket here. Adaptive testing. We talked about that. That computer that knows you. Formative assessment. Oh, multimodal. Let's recognize that students have different strengths and learning styles. Assessments may involve a combination of written, oral, visual, hands-on. Both toward things they do well and things they don't do well. You need them to learn something. Yeah. Machine learning and AI, and they can analyze a vast amount of data and assess student performance, identifying learning patterns and things. But that's a lot of work. They'd have to really analyze big body of work. I don't know. And self-assessment and reflection.
I think that's an important one too.
Yeah, that is.
But it has to be done properly. It has to be done properly. I worked with a guy. This is 36 years ago. I worked with somebody, and he used to have the students do a self-assessment at the end of the semester. And he'd allowed them to grade themselves. And he was a very popular teacher because, well, the girls were all oohing and awing over him because he was like the cool guy. He was like young, good looking, everything.
Yeah.
And he would do that form of assessment or self-assessment, and that's how he put out his grades. So the students actually graded themselves, which is a very dangerous thing to do because once students figure that out, then they don't do anything, and then they just come in and they just do that. But aside from that self-assessment, how else I think that the self-assessment, as long as it's honest and honorable, I think that's wonderful. But, you know, how would you do that so that you knew that the student wasn't just sort of carving out an A for themselves
Right.
and using a lot
Well,
of
there's
BS? Are you talking about what
yeah.
they learned on each step of the process and doing the reflective work?
Uh,
And I think that's something that we talked about earlier, was that self-reflection was something that students really needed to learn. And so using that, do you think that that's what
yeah.
they're talking about?
Yeah. Um, Self-reflection to me demands an investment in the content.
Okay.
So I was just thinking about how I would approach it. If I don't care about the class and I'm just trying to scratch through the C or B, I really don't care. And the teacher hasn't particularly sparked my attention. And I'm like, okay, well, we're going to self assess now. I'm writing a fairly concocted self assessment of myself. I'm not really looking deep at myself or, wow, did I really do something? Well, what would he want to hear kind of thing.
Hmm.
Whereas if I was really invested in the course and the professor or the teachers actually challenged me, um, my self-assessment becomes very genuine and authentic. You know, at first you did this and that challenged me. I didn't like it. It forced me to take on another approach, which I did. Here's what I learned through that approach. So I'd use examples. The other examples were generic. Oh, I learned to write better because I did so many rough drafts of this one particular paragraph. It's like, yeah, you and I were banging on that paragraph and you thought it was important. And golly, I learned a lot doing it. It's like, so you got to be invested in it. And the teacher has to have the relationship too. Yeah, 25, 28 kids, period 3. Here's your self assessment. They're like, yep, I'm moving on. But maybe 5 of them
um,
will love you, but
I
yeah,
think I think that it would also be beneficial for the students to also assess the instructor,
that's always been interesting.
because I want to know.
Yeah,
I mean, if a student says, "I really hate your guts. I think that you're just a
yeah,
lower abdominal orifice and you can go pollinate yourself," that says nothing to me.
yeah,
Okay. If a
yeah.
student says, "You challenged me. I want to know how I challenged them. What worked and what didn't work." I need to know,
Right,
because I need that form of assessment back from them in order to
right.
guide my practice in
That'd be
future
nice.
classes.
Well, you're
And
talking about collaborative learning, aren't you?
I suppose I
I mean,
am.
yeah, and that's what we love to do, and that's what we did, but that's what's missing from so many classrooms.
Mhm.
There's no time to collaborate in 55 minutes, period 3, Mr. Simpson's class. It's just not happening.
You
You
have
know, I,
you have an incredible number of
yeah,
opportunities for
there's 32
collaborative
kids,
learning.
30, 28 kids in there. And, you want to do it, but then it's kind of like people got to meet you.
Mhm.
You can extend the help, but Lord knows how many kids just duck and cover from the teacher.
Right.
And
Right.
then
And
we
I
add
think
on the
that,
attendance problems we're having. But yeah,
but I believe that if you have the relationship with the students that's honest and honorable,
yeah,
and it's one where you build the trust with them, because you don't have that trust on day one. You have to build that
no,
trust with them, and they have to
yeah,
learn that you are there to help them and to guide them and to work with them, and that you are constantly looking to help build their strengths, but also to practice on their weaknesses so that those can become part of their strategy of brilliance, so to speak, in their lifetime, so that that weakness no longer is a weakness. Maybe it's a weaker
right,
form of their strength, but we can get that going. And once
right.
they have that and they feel the self confidence with you, and you don't have to like each other, you just have to respect each other.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
And as
yeah,
I mean, not everybody's going to like your cup of tea. They may want something completely different, but they can respect that that's what it is.
Right.
And that way you can have an honest response from them. And I've always found that I would say that 99.9% of the time, my students are willing to give me an honest response, because I tell, even when they're doing their writing and I'm teaching English, and I say, I would like you to write a paper. And they say, well, what do you want us to say? And it's like, I don't care what you say. I want to know what you know. I don't want you to spit back what you think I want to hear. If you have an opinion that's differing from mine, I want to know what that is, and I want to know how you support it. If you have an opinion that's the same as mine, I need you to be able to support that as well. So I'm not going to give you my actual opinions, because I need you to form your own. And I need you to be able to support those. And if you can do that, then I can respect you. And then we can talk about that. And I can play devil's advocate. And I found that some students were absolutely unnerved by such a thought.
Yeah, they were, aren't they?
But it really helped, because they need to form their own person.
Well, that begs a question that I'd love for you to answer. Maybe we're not going to answer it. So there's two approaches to teaching. Is one, you don't want them to know what your opinion is at all.
Right.
You want to maintain as much of a neutrality as you can. And two, you are free to express your opinions, but you express them. You don't do it. You don't pontificate in a way that preaches. You just, well, what do you think, Mr. Summers? Here's what I think, and here's why I think it. And so as long as you're not preaching, you're just offering your side of it, and then you're very open to the two-way. That would be the way to do it, obviously. So
as a Libra,
I was more of the latter. Yeah.
As a Libra, somebody would say something and they'd say, what do you think? And I would say, well, at first blush, here's what I'm hearing, and this is what I see. However, I also see this. And then they start asking questions. So I will go with whatever way that they're asking the questions, because it's their learning opportunity. It's not my place to preach. It's not my church.
That's exactly correct.
It's their church. And so their beliefs need to develop their own beliefs, not come up with my beliefs. And I know far too many teachers, and I had this put upon me too, where the instructors would dictate what we believed. And I never trusted those people, and I didn't respect them. So this comes from my middle school and high school experience.
I will always be ready with my opinion about something. When it comes about teaching, what do I think about teaching? Here's what I think about teaching.
Right.
I never say, here's what I would do, because you're not me, but I would say, here's how I do things. As far as, like when it came to political science, and I would offer opinions about the Constitution, for example. I would say, this precedent, this ruling said this, and from then on, that ruling was precedent, and therefore that's how we operated. And I tend to agree with this Supreme Court ruling. I think it was pretty much the time that we needed to either do this or do that.
Right.
And here's why. I would love to tell you. I don't want to bore them, but yeah, I just trying to keep things neutral or just delivering information is not. I don't think you can do it. I don't think you can be a total objective teacher.
You can't,
because you just omit stuff.
Right.
If you're trying to just fax, man, you just omit. And omission is one of the ways that you badly deliver curriculum, by omitting things, or not only just changing them, but omitting them, not talking about that, things like that.
But it's also okay to say, I don't know.
Which I say a ton. I say a ton. A couple issues, it's like, I don't know. And I won't offer my opinion Well, what would you do, or what would you think? No, no, that one's not. I won't touch it. And not publicly. I mean, if I had to make that decision, here's where it would go. But I won't say that either because that it's just a situational thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And they'll ask me
there's
a
some.
question.
Yeah,
I've had students ask me a question, and they'll say, why is it that people believe X, Y, and Z?
yeah, yeah,
And, and we will parse through that together. I
yeah.
don't have to
That's a good
give
one.
them my perceptions of it. I can say, maybe here's what I've heard, and this is my
Here's
understanding.
history. Here's how
Right.
history's treated that, or whatever. Yeah.
Hmm. But there
Good
may be
example
more
would
to
be
it than I
Israel.
think.
Yeah, like Israel and Hamas. In Palestine, there that
Right.
the conflict in Gaza. I understand both sides. I know the history very, very well. I see it totally different than other people see it.
Hmm.
I don't take a side. It's like it's a horrible situation.
It is.
And it gets worse and worse every second it goes on. And both sides are just neck deep in that carnage. And
Hmm.
that's what's happening right now. Now I realize how they got there, but it's like it's just ugly right now. And I feel that the immediate attention would be on the victims of this violence, not the perpetrators per se. There's a lot of innocent people being hurt, and that's a very big tragedy.
Hmm.
That's kind of what makes people angry. I don't think anybody's
Right.
angry at casualties on either side of the conflict. I think people are very angry at the fact that children and older people and old women and old men are dying, because the place is being blown apart by both people's sides. And so there you go.
Right.
I guess that's my opinion, but it settles on it. War is bad. We can debate on how that happened, but I don't think anybody's going, yeah, that situation really could turn out well for somebody there.
Right.
I
That's
don't think
one
it
that
could.
I would probably pull out and away from with students simply because
Yeah, I
I would
might.
say, it's an incendiary kind of discussion.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
and to be honest, I have heard so much from both sides.
Hmm. Yeah,
And I really, and I don't know how much of it's propaganda. I don't know how much of it is actual real information. And I'm trying to sort through everything. And so I can't really give a rational answer to that simply because I don't know. And I'm
right.
trying to
I
figure it
don't
out as
know.
well. And I
Yeah,
know
I
some
don't
people will say
know.
that's a cop out, but it's not a cop out. I'm telling the truth. And if they say you have to
Yeah,
pick a side, I know I don't have to pick a side right now. I'm telling you where I am.
yeah. I mean, I would even contend that picking a side is not the only option. I mean, it's like, well, there's one side or the other. You got to pick one. It's like,
No.
no, you don't. You don't really. I mean, there are other options here.
Mhm.
Yeah, and what they would be, I don't know. I'm looking for them. I'm sitting squarely in the middle, sort of looking at it. It you kind of got to like assess what the motive behind that would be. Speaking of
Right.
assessments, but yeah, you know, everybody knows when they're being put to a test that's not fair. And not that people mind being tested. I think they mind being tested in ineffective and inefficient ways. They don't like being tested and wasting their energy.
People don't like being judged.
That is very true.
And if you
That
think
is
about
that
it,
is awesome. Yeah.
people don't
Yeah.
like uninformed judgments.
Yeah.
People don't like it when a teacher says, this is what you're getting on this project, and you have no idea why. And the teacher says, we'll talk about it later, or they give you
Right.
incomplete answers, because you're entitled to have a reason for it. And you're also entitled to, the only word that comes to my mind right now, reform your work. And so that's why the formative assessment as you're moving along is so important, because that way you can catch the glitches.
Yeah, and it shows
And
up on all the lists first and foremost. Formative, yeah.
right. And that way it's going through. And then the big question I think that comes out of that is grading. Because we're talking about
Well,
equitable grading these days. And so, playing around with not just Chat GPT, but like several other forms of AI, and asking what's
yeah,
the most equitable form of assessment, what is the least biased, and using the
yeah.
rubric is actually the top one,
Really?
and project based learning.
Project-based learning, Rubrics, yeah.
Right. And if you are redesigning your assessment strategies and just going through it, and also if you have the cooperation of the students in the design, you're doing swimmingly well, because that's what it's about. And you've got to have that. I think you brought it up, the collaboration.
Yeah, you really kind of wrapped it up in a really nice package with what you said. I thought
Thank you.
so. Yeah, it just comes down to everyone wants not to be judged on criteria that's not personally related to them.
Hmm.
I just nobody wants to stand in line and be stamped on the forehead with A, B, or C, or D, Doug. Um, like we did alternative ed. No one got a C or a D. We just didn't accept it. I'm sorry, this is not C work, and it won't be accepted until it is. I don't give Fs and I don't give Ds.
Right.
Either you get it or you don't. And it's like, no, you can't kind of figure out how to be bad in degrees. You've got to
Hmm.
meet a certain standard. And I think when people meet that, they go, "Well, that's a C. Yeah, then you can sit on that. I would do better, but you can sit on that. That's okay. You can own that. It's part
but
of you."
but what do you say to the people who say that it's unfair that you won't accept D work?
Well, it may be unfair. That is true. Life is unfair. I will agree. It's just my standard. And my standard was not just, I wasn't a lonely Lord of, I am the only one that doesn't give D's or F's. We all decided there are no D's and F's, and we all support each other.
Hmm.
And we'd all know what that standard would generally be. And they go, well, you can't get a D. So do more work, bring up the grade,
Yeah.
get the credit. Yeah. It's just the standard that people will rise to.
Do we need
Uh,
standards? Do you the
yes.
importance of standards in assessment, is that really that important? Is I know the answer, but I'm going to ask
Yeah.
you anyway, because
Well,
for a
if you're
lot of
talking about
people.
standards like reading, writing, and arithmetic, there's some debate on that, but certain standards of behavior, standards of attendance,
Hmm.
standards of involvement, respect as a general behavior when you deal with people is a standard. That's just the kind of way things have to work in a school. Yeah,
Yeah.
the cursing thing is it's really bad. And it's a subculture of high schools that took over the main culture, and I don't know where it fits in society, but the halls of a high school sound like freaking barracks.
They
Like,
do.
fuck this, and they're dropping f-bombs everywhere. It's just adjective, verb, noun in one sentence. It's like, dude, really, is there another word in your vocab? And all of them just drop it, and they scream it in the halls, and it's like, wow, this is a
Well, it's
school.
it's so pervasive in the culture now. You hear it on
And
the
it's
radio, you hear it in the music, you see it on television with streaming.
that's fine, but in a high school or church, or grandma's dinner table, I used to say, "Hey, grandma, Pass the F and potatoes. How many of us would have survived that one?
None. Nobody.
No, it's great. It's like there's a place and a time, and I tell them too. I'm against bad language. I'm against just complete and utter reckless use of every expletive you've ever heard, just because you think it makes you sound something. It's too much. Everybody, it's too much. Choose when you drop an F-bomb or say the S word, for like a point, not just because you can say it and no one's stopping you. Standard.
Create an assessment.
Create an assessment.
Over the use of
the
language.
Yeah, which would be dynamic. I would change it if things changed. It wouldn't be rigid, but there would be certain, certain, what was that word? We had standards. Yeah. It's like, you just can't be dropping the F-bomb at school all the time, but it's just been taken over.
And I think administration has just thrown their hands up.
Yeah, they have, there's no accountability. I hate to say that. It sounds like cantankerous.
There is no accountability.
There's not. No, I can say it, and what are you going to do about it? And actually nothing. Okay, then I win. Yeah.
There are tons of podcasts by teachers, and they talk about the lack of accountability. The people, the group that is being held accountable are the teachers, not the students, not the administrators, not the parents. It's all coming down on the teachers, and that's why teachers are leaving droves.
Yeah, or being forced out, or they're just. When they say there's a teacher shortage, they're actually forcing teachers out over issues like this. No, we choose the student over you. You may now leave the district. And they don't say that out loud. They say, well, we've had differences, or they come up with some other reason. But that's how they get rid of people.
But it's not a teacher shortage, it's teacher retention. They cannot keep the teachers that they have.
Absolutely. It's a teacher retention problem. Yeah. We're willing and ready. Most of us, but it's an impossible situation most of the time.
Completely, and
it is.
Yeah. So, and if we only had collaborative assessments with our administrators, maybe things might be a little different.
Yeah, I would like to assess some of my administrators. I would say, for example, I have no basis whatsoever to assess you on, which is a large problem. Because you're accountable to me, you're supposed to support me. Yeah. So how come it is I don't know what you do?
But they don't see it as they need to support you because they see it more as a hierarchy.
Yes, they do. I'm just an underling. They're the boss. I'm an underling. They tell me what to do, I do it. You don't support workers, you use them.
Yes. Yes.
With that. No. It is.
Yes, and with that.
Our editorial, but
next week we'll be doing our episode will be covering bias in assessments, and we are working hard to try to get our subscribership up to 500. So make sure that you do hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button and share us. Give us a review. So, until next week, reach for the sky, keep your feet on the ground, and we will see you then. Until then, bye-bye.
Aloha.